Hello, my name is Joseph Hand. I am the Senior Director of Product Strategy at AppAssure Software. Today we're going to be talking about the top 3 backup technologies for 2012. So the top 3 technologies include number 1, live recovery, number 2, recovery assure, and number 3, universal recovery. These 3 technologies enable us to deliver one of the most exciting products in this industry to date. So let's dive right in and talk about these 3 exciting technologies. Live recovery. So before we talk about what live recovery actually can do for you, let's kind of set the stage as to how we get there. So think in terms of traditional backup. Traditional backup, you would run it once per day, usually at night. So that gives you what we call a recovery point objective, or RPO, of 24 hours. With an RPO of 24 hours, that simply means if you had an outage at 6 p.m. on a given day, that means you would throw away all of the work that was done, all of the transactions that were done, any customer interactions, any things against your database or email, whatever it is that failed, just throw it in the garbage and start from last night. So you'll have that rework to catch up on and try and remember where all those transactions were and what they did and how they did it. So what AppAssure has done is we've taken a slightly different approach when it comes to the actual backup of the data. So the first thing we did was we set out to really make it so that we don't cause that impact. So one of the ways we've done that is by implementing something called change block tracking. This is something that's been in the core product since the very beginning, back in 2006. So CBT, what it does is, if you look at traditional backup, when they have to do an incremental, they actually have to go through and read the entire disk to determine what was done on that disk in between backups. It uses the archive bit. So it has to read the entire disk. Causes a tremendous amount of disk I/O, and other system processes to keep that thing going. That's one of the reasons why you can only do this kind of thing at night, but that also presents other problems like backup windows, and will we hit those? A lot of companies do. They hit their backup window, they surpass it, they come, start a full on a Friday night, come in Monday morning, it's still running, things like that. The other thing that we're doing is we're moving all other work that has to be done to the data over to the AppAssure core server. The AppAssure core server is responsible for things like compression and data deduplication, for any testing that gets done to the data to make sure that data has integrity. All of those things happen on the core. So the side effect on the actual protected server during a snapshot is we see an average of 1 to 2% CPU utilization. We see an average of 50 to 100 megs of memory being consumed, and we see very, very little disk I/O. That enables us to do a recovery point objective as frequent as every 5 minutes, 288 snaps a day. Now that we have this uber level of granularity, let's talk about recovery, and RTO, recovery time objective. Traditional or legacy software, RTO, simply means begin your restore and then come back in 2 to 24 hours, however long it's going to take for the amount of data you're restoring. And once that's complete, you can go ahead and put your users back on the applications, get everybody up and running. If it's, let's say it's a terabyte of data, in a lot of cases, some systems might take up to 2 days to restore that kind of amount of data. And a terabyte today is really not a lot of data when you think about it, Multi-terabyte systems, are springing up all over the data center these days. As a great example, take a look at Microsoft Word. Take a document that was created in like Word 6 and compare it to Word 2010. Same text, probably 4 or 5 times the size of the original document. Not to mention all of the rich media that's out there, between WAV files in your voicemail system that go automatically to your email system, to video and audio content that's being utilized more and more within the enterprise and within the small and medium business as part of our daily jobs, as part of what we do. All right? So data amounts continue to grow. So RTO is really critical. When you think about it, if you've had a failure, and the old way of having 24-hour RPO, and then having some form of legacy long-term restore, you're looking at a total loss of productivity of usually anywhere from 48 to even double that hours, right? So how do we compare? On the recovery side, when we go to recover a volume, what live recovery does for us is it gives us the ability to literally flip a switch, right? And have that data available. Let's take a peek at how we do that, right? Technically sophisticated. So what it actually entails is a volume subsystem layer filter driver that runs on the protected server. Okay, so anytime during recovery a block request comes in, the filter driver is responsible for satisfying that request. From an administrative perspective, you're literally clicking on restore, and moments later things just happen. So it's very easy to manage, very easy to set in motion. And then the other thing is it literally takes moments to complete. On average, 40 to 60 seconds after the restore begins, everything is done. Now you're probably wondering what all this everything is, right? And we're going to show you in just a moment. Some highlights of how the process works, right? The request, whether it's coming from a human, an application, or some kind of system process, whatever it is, think of it as a giant funnel. The Windows I/O stack as a funnel. The requests come in at the top, and as it goes down, it starts to funnel down into the, eventually gets to the bottom of the funnel at the volume subsystem, where it's only looking for a block of data from the volume. Now we intercept that request at that point. The driver is smart enough to look at the local volumes and say, hey, has that block been restored? If it has, it passes it through. If it hasn't, then it goes out to the core server, right, the media server, and says, hey, I'm looking for this block. And that block will then reprioritize, jump to the front of the queue, shoot back, and be served up immediately. Pretty interesting stuff. Let's go take a quick peek at what the benefits of this approach are. All right. Number one, what we're looking at is the ability to get you back up and running in almost zero time. Number two, your users can be productive. Right? So let's take a look at the software. Over here, I've got, let's say for instance, my Exchange server, one of my more mission critical applications. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take those stores offline. Last one. Okay, all my stores are now offline. Now this server that I have here, originally I set this server up following the Microsoft best practices, right? So that means I have my operating system and my application and the patches for both of those on the C drive. Then I've separated out my database and my log files for Exchange, right? So we'll go in here and we can see I've got my EDB files. It's not a tremendous amount of data in here, but we're going to delete it just the same. On the logs, this is Exchange 2010, so there are separate individual folders for logs for each one of my databases. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to wipe those out as well. And then to make things interesting, I always throw this volume in here. This is 174 gigabytes worth of data on a 200 gig volume. Despite what you're about to see from the Microsoft perspective of how much data it thinks it's deleting, It's something that I have not been able to pin down as to why it happens. But you can see here 174 gigabytes of data, 69,000 files. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll delete all of those. It thinks it's over 600 gigs worth of data, over 250,000 files. Regardless of what it believes, it's 174 plus the exchange data, so by the time we're all said and done, it's roughly 200 gigabytes worth of data that we're basically wiping out. Now the trick is to get it back quickly. So for that, I go to my Exchange server in the UI, in the AppAssure UI, click on recovery points, right, and this will get me to all of those individual points in time that I can restore from. You can see at the top here where my mouse is kind of circling, I've got 42 recovery points taken so far, and that's because I'm on a 15-minute interval, and I've taken a snapshot every 15 minutes since midnight last night, equaling 42. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to right-click at this top level on the first recovery point, the most recent, and we're going to say Restore. Now, if this was a total system meltdown, we obviously have the bare metal capability built right in here. For that, you're going to boot off of a boot CD, ISO image, or thumb drive that you've created with our software. You'll come to a console, you'll put in the IP address here, hit check, and step through the rest of the wizard. Now, even though the bare metal process will get you back up and running, it is our recommendation that you only use the bare metal process on the C drive, right, the system and boot partitions. That way, you restore the bulk of the data through this top option, original source. We want the system to be online, and we want to have the new repaired volumes or whatever was broken fixed so that we can do the restore back to the same volume size. And if it was a failed disk and I had to replace it and I had to recreate the volume, that's fantastic. I can do all that, no issues. Right? Once that's done, I start my restore. Now, in this case, we're going to do entire disks. We're not going to do the C drive, and we're not going to do the system reserved partition. Right? This is that whole 2008 R2 and Windows 7 new methodology from Microsoft, as opposed to the old days of boot INI. Right? So we're going to leave that alone. But we are going to restore the E drive with the databases, the F drive with the logs, and the I drive with that 174 gigabytes of data. Now note here on the bottom we have a couple of features, and they're selected by default: live replay and forced dismount of volumes if necessary. We're going to leave those checked. Now we also found that we have some databases here, so we're going to go ahead and leave this checked as well: remount storage groups after restore. We'll say next, and then we can hit start. We'll wait for a brief acknowledgement. That should come up right here, and there it is, initiated successfully. And now we can hit finish. So with that, you know, what most administrators will do at this point is they'll come back to the main page and they'll sit here and they'll watch these pretty progress bars and wait for them to start moving and watch their data get restored that way. I prefer to actually go back to the original host and watch it from here. All right. So now that one of the options that was checked was forced dismount of volumes if necessary. So what's going to happen here, and I've removed my hand from the mouse, look, nothing up my sleeves, that kind of thing. Since I'm highlighted on the I drive, when that last volume, because it goes from top to bottom, gets dismounted and remounted, the window will disappear. It should happen any second, and there it goes. So now, if I go back to here, you can see that I've got data. Right, there's my databases. Here's my log files. And here is my 174 gigabytes of data, including the ability to go into a particular folder, pick a picture, open it up, and see, that there is actual data here. More importantly, we are running a mission critical app, so why don't we go ahead and just hit refresh on the console here, and you'll notice that all of my databases are mounted. So once again, the process, right, for me to mount that database is simply go back to the server and go back to the filter and say I need these blocks to be able to see these files. right? Those got pushed back first. The metadata came back first. Now, as a user requests an email or a calendar item or opens a file in a file server, does a query against a SQL server, those blocks will get prioritized. If they're not already back, they'll come back instantly and be served up. So where it takes some companies or some legacy applications, anywhere from 2 to 24 to 48 hours to do a complete restore, when your users are unproductive during that time, for us, there is no restore window. We simply just start it, and then you have complete access to all of the data from that point forward. So now let's talk about Recovery Assure. Recovery Assure is where other products have gone in terms of their ability to verify a system's data, taken that to new heights. All right, so what does that exactly mean? From the beginning, we've had this verify option in all of the in almost every backup product. Right, the verify option would do a comparison of the original media and the backup media. Right? So once I've done this comparison, I know that the data is identical. I can give it a green light or a check mark or a status 0, and I can tell you very easily that, hey, everything is back and everything is up and running, and you've got good data sitting here. Right? Now, where does that fall down? Think about data corruption. Right? So if you have some corrupt data in your Exchange database or your SQL database, and you back it up on a daily basis, and then you run your verify option, presuming you haven't turned it off to try and solve backup window issues, that completes successfully because the tape or the disk that you were backing up to matches the original media, including the corruption. Can you recover? The answer is probably not. So what we do is we verify the backup by looking at the volume data. We verify the application data and its application by actually examining the content of that data. Right? We are application aware, and that is the key. We know what's supposed to be within that Exchange server, and we darn well expect to see it there when we go to back it up. Right? When you back up, like let's say you have an Exchange server and you've got 10 volumes on it, and maybe 5 of those volumes are databases, 5 are logs, and let's say one of the log volumes just drops out. Right? You get a disk error, and the thing just disappears. So how do you handle something like that in your backup product? Your backup product just simply goes and backs up all of the things it can see. If one of them happens to not be there, it doesn't know any different, right? We expect it to be there. So what does the process look like? Well, for the next several screens, you're going to see this similar model, right? And for 1 and 2, right, which is just taking a server and backing up its data by getting the change blocks, right? No additional work, zero impact. Snaps happen as often as every 5 minutes. Takes that data and moves it down to the AppAssure core server and its repository where the data is stored, deduped, and compressed. Now, for every system that we back up, for every volume that we back up, once per night, we will reassemble the volume itself, okay, into using a virtual disk driver that is part of the core. And once the volume's been reassembled, we can run things like check disk, right, to make sure that everything is good. So we're using check disk in the first 3 of its 4 stages to make sure all of that data is actually usable. We look at things like the MFT, the security descriptors, the file descriptors, right? The file allocation table information. So we know that everything is in good health. If something pops up that isn't supposed to be there, we're going to send a notification. Otherwise, we give it a little green check, and now you know at that point in time, your volumes can be restored as a whole. Right? You can restore that data. There's no question anymore. For SQL Server, same process, right? We go through at nighttime, step number 3. We mount the volumes. we do our volume integrity check and our nightly database attachability tests at the same time while we have these created. So the next thing we do after the volume integrity test completes is we use a local instance of SQL, and we actually attach each one of those databases and make sure that when you need to attach a copy of that data from your backup, you can. So on a nightly basis, I know that the volumes are sound, and I know that my SQL data, if called upon, will always work. Removes all of the doubt. Makes it so that you have always the ability to sleep at night. Now on the Exchange side, we do things a little differently. Number one, instead of doing the equivalent of the attachability test, which we call a mountability test, instead of doing that once per night, we're actually doing it on every snapshot. So after every snap completes, even as frequent as every 5 minutes, we will mount the volumes, and then we will use a copy of the ESE engine that we've borrowed from your Exchange server, and we will go through and mount each one of the databases. Alright, so it's very similar to the attach test. When a mount occurs, it first looks at all of the components that make up the database files, the databases, the logs, everything. Has to know that the headers are good, has to know that it was not shut down dirty, right? So it looks for that as well. After all of that completes, it runs through its recovery steps. In other words, it rolls or does a pseudo roll of the logs to make sure it can, and then it gives it the green check, status 0, telling you that at any point in time during the day, any one of those is mountable and usable. Right? Now, once per night, we take it one step further. And that's where we do something called the detailed integrity check. Right? So that at the same time that we're doing the volume integrity check, we're looking at the databases using ESEutil/K, so we know page by page, every page in the database is 100% corruption free. The benefits? It is the most efficient verification on the market. Right? In other words, it happens inline, it happens instantly when it's supposed to, right? It happens at night for the nightly stuff. And it tells you that everything is good. And when we say everything is good, it's a 100% guarantee that that data is actually going to work. It gives you data integrity. It tells you right off the bat everything is good. Now the reduction in total cost of ownership, this is huge, right? Because without having the ability to do this level of testing and level of inspection of your data built into your product in an automated fashion, what you're doing is you're trusting the verify option if you're using it. And the other thing you're doing is on a periodic basis, you're taking your, hopefully you're taking a tape sampling and you're doing restores and you're making sure that it's recoverable. But who's to say that what you restore today is actually going to work tomorrow? There's a million factors into why tapes don't recover or why older backups don't recover. And unless you're proactively testing this, you're never going to know. And proactively testing is very expensive. It takes time. It takes an administrator's time. Right? So the other thing is it ensures data and apps are always recoverable. Gives you peace of mind. Alright, so before we hop into number 3, let's go back to the demo environment and let's show you what makes up Recovery Assure. Alright, so first and foremost, talk about setup. Right? So let's say, for instance, I was adding a new Exchange server to the environment. Right? What is entailed for me to actually get this set of features up and running? Right? Whereas in the old days it was a checkbox for verify. And that was all you got because that's all it did. It did that bit level comparison. The newer point products that are out there for certain specific solutions like VMware, they have whole, major setup steps to get what they would call their version of verification up and running, where you're going to build virtual machines, you're going to have to stand them up, you're going to need infrastructure to do that. Well, first of all, you're also going to need some kind of agents on hosts to make sure that you can reach through and do backups and recoveries through these, so you're not impacting the main box. We call it a proxy, right? There's all of these steps are separate virtual networks, but in the end of the day, you still have to boot these things up to know that they're going to work. And on top of that, once they're up, you're going to have to do something to the application to make sure it works. And they're, typical of these types of solutions is pinging a port. Well, what if the port's still active and the data is corrupt? How would you ever know? Right? You're not going to run this in the daytime because you're not going to go out and buy a totally separate clone of your production environment just so you can run these tests. So you're back to your 24-hour RPO again. All right? So in our world, it's as simple as deploying the software, adding the system. All right, and by the way, this is going to fail on trying to add because the system's already protected, but it'll allow us to get through the wizard. I'll choose the storage I want to back up to, and I'll get the failure right here. It tells me that it's already protected, but it'll let us continue. So now the defaults. Protect all fixed volumes, right? So we want to make sure we get all of those. All right. Protection start time, go ahead and start immediately because we know even our full does not impact your production environment. And then here's the first portion of Recovery Assure, and that's perform nightly volume integrity check. It's checked by default. Now on the last screen here before we hit finish, validate the Exchange mailbox stores are mountable, selected by default. The only other things you need to do are check the box that says perform detailed integrity check, do it every night, and truncate my log. So that was literally two check boxes and a radio button that you had to hit in order to get this up and running and working and set up and never have to touch it again. All right. After that, it'll do its full backup. After the full, it'll go back to its interval and start backing up and testing the data as it goes along. What does it look like? Well, you saw those lovely green check marks that I had on the screen earlier. Well, let's go take a closer look. All right, under recovery points, all of these green check marks simply mean I can recover this data, and when I do, it'll actually work. That's it. That's Recovery Assure. Now let's talk about Universal Recovery. Universal Recovery, it's just what it says it is. All right, think about it. It's anything to anything. That's what it comes down to. All right. So this is a collection of technologies that enables us to reach in and get every last, down to a simple little text file all the way on up to an entire physical or virtual system and everything in between. All right. So again, based on what you're about to see, there's going to be a reduction in total cost of ownership in actually having to perform the day-to-day tasks. Right? So bare metal. Bare metal is used for physical. Right? So to recover a system, you're going to boot off of that ISO image thumb drive or CD. You're going to get to the recovery console, put in the get the IP address from that console, put it in the core server, initiate the restore of your boot and system volume, and then leverage the live recovery features for the rest of the volumes on the machine. If it's a dissimilar piece of hardware, right? Maybe you've got an old Dell and you're replacing it with a new Dell, and it's got a totally different disk controller in it. No problem. Before you reboot, after you've done your recovery, click on the Replay Recover Anywhere button, and you'll have a wizard that'll step you through injecting the appropriate driver for the new controller. Once that's complete, go ahead and reboot the system, start your live recovery of your other data volumes, and the minute that begins, you're back to work. If you follow the Microsoft best practices and you have a typical C drive of 20 to 30 gigs, most bare metals with a gigabit network are going to be accessible, usable, and back online to your users in under 15 minutes. The other thing about universal recovery, in the virtual space, It's probably better seen from the demo itself. Why don't we just hop back over there? From the virtual space, if I had to recover, let's say this Exchange server were virtual, which it is, and I had to recover it, all I'd have to do is simply right-click and say Create Virtual Machine. Now we have a wizard that will enable us to export to Hyper-V or VMware formats. Let's say it's VMware. We could do one-time or continuous. Well, one-time is I need to do this restore. And maybe during a one-time, I'm going to follow the same line of thinking, and I'm not going to do the data volume restores. I'm only going to build this virtual machine from the perspective of the C drive and the SRP. After the export is complete, I can use the vSphere console for VMware or the Hyper-V console for Hyper-V. I can add in 3 new virtual disks, go into Windows once the system's booted, format the volumes, and then use the live recovery feature to do the actual data volume recovery. Right? So again, in usually under 15 minutes, I can have it back and running. If that's not quick enough, then we have continuous export. Continuous, I would do it in advance of a failure or a disaster. And the beauty of this is I can do this not just here in the local site, but I can also be replicating that data over to another data center, to another core server. Could be in the cloud, could be in your basement, it could be anywhere in between. And over here, I can do the same thing in continuous mode, right? So that my machine in its entirety gets built. Use thin provisioning here, set the memory if I want to override, right? Log into a vCenter or directly into an ESX or ESXi host here. Choose the host if it is vCenter, choose the data store, choose the resource pool. Tell it any overrides to the recommended storage allocation. Make sure I have the naming convention that I want here and choose a virtual network. And then the last screen, since we are in continuous mode, is how frequently should I poll for updates and when do you want me to begin? Right? What it will do, again, whether it's here in the DR center or here in the other center, what it's going to do at this point is it's going to build you a virtual machine. Right? Much similar to right here, right under JHAN Mega Dell. This is actually my laptop. I've got export suspended, but I have a complete clone of my laptop sitting in my virtual standby. So if this were up and running instead of being suspended, let's say it's a production Exchange server, and I've created the machine. After the original creation, based on my interval, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to update those offline VMDK or VHD files every time a new snap occurs. So the most they're behind is by your interval. If you have a 5-minute interval, the most they're behind is 5 minutes. Which is absolutely fantastic, because now, instead of having to perform a restore, all I have to do is start up my virtual and I'm up and running. Right? P to V, V to P. So what if, the most crazy radical scenario, a customer of ours called us up, said his system failed. He was running ESXi, the, off-the-shelf free version, no clustering, no nothing. He was running 3 virtuals. One of those virtual machines was so critical he needed to have it up and running instantly, as fast as possible, right, in order to transact business. So he called Dell. They told him the machine will be there in 3 or 4 days. So he called us and he said, what are my options? How can I do this? So it was already virtual. The machine itself that he's talking about, the actual virtual machine, right, was already running in a virtual space, but he doesn't have a server capable of running that. So we asked him if he had anything, right, that might actually run this instance, and he did. He had an old desktop in the closet. He took it out. He added an external drive to it. Right, it was an eSATA drive, and he was able to restore the C drive from the virtual machine into this new physical piece of hardware. Run the dissimilar wizard, add the appropriate controller, and that was it. He booted it up. It worked. The next thing he did was he basically performed the live restore of his data volume, and he was up and running. When his new system came in, waited till Friday night, did the recovery back to the original VM, and he's up and running. He's a very happy customer. Right? So that's, pretty standard stuff. Now, granular, we have that virtual disk driver we talked about earlier. Let's say, for instance, all of these pictures in the show to directory here, were accidentally selected, and then while holding the shift key they accidentally hit the delete button. And lo and behold, all the files are gone. All right? How do we recover files? Well, we do a little bit of user interrogation. We dig into a recovery point where it's about the time they deleted it or just before it. Right-click and simply say Explore. In the background, we're going to go back to the original base image. We're going to mount that, and then we're going to knit together all of the incrementals between then and the current point in time that we've clicked on. Once that is created, it's a view, like a database view. The next thing we'll do is we'll mount that view to a Windows volume mount point using Windows. Once it's mounted, it'll pop open in Windows Explorer, and lo and behold, I have complete access to my data. And in here you will find the 920 pictures that were taken of show 2. Now I can just right click. I can say copy. Let me just minimize my window here, open up a second Windows Explorer window to the actual directory, which is empty. Right click, and we can just simply say paste. Now it's still using Terracopy, so I'm going to get that Terracopy dialog up. I actually like this utility. It does a little better of a job. And my favorite thing in the world, I've actually sent this into Microsoft numerous times, a pause button. You can pause your copy and paste, which is a fantastic thing. So that's it, right? I'm doing a recovery. Now, because it's using Windows Explorer, I can even use things like Windows Search or any other shell tool like Terracopy, for instance. While that's going, what if it's an Exchange server and somebody's looking for a piece of mail? Right? Again, when did you delete it? Find the recovery point, and then just choose, right-click and choose one of the opens next to one of your database names. Right? So I'll open the executives database. Same process in the background, where we're going to go ahead and we're going to mount the volumes necessary for this restore. In this case, E and F. E my databases, F my logs. Once that view is created, we'll then open the EDB file directly, roll the logs, create a short little index, and then pop it open in a separate UI that enables us to see inside the mailboxes. My file level restore is done. I can come back out here. I can close all those windows. Inside the UI here, I can right click the iDrive and I can just say dismount, and it'll go ahead and dismount it. And right about now we should have our Exchange window open. Alright, now I can drill down into a specific mailbox, go into a specific folder, highlight some messages, find the ones that are actually relevant. Once I have them highlighted, right click restore, and here I have three options. One, put them in a recovery folder. You can see I've done that a couple times out here, right? So it'll create a folder at the top level with the date and time, and then underneath that the server, underneath that the storage group or database name, underneath that the mailbox name, and underneath that all the other stuff that we've put back. This is helpful if you're doing a lot of restores for forensics reasons and you needed to keep everything separated and, by date and time. You can also put them directly into a PST file that you've mounted to the local instance of Outlook. right? Because we do require an Outlook profile locally installed. And then restore back to original location, which enables you to put it right back to the user's mailbox. We'll say next and we'll say start. And at the beginning of this, it'll log into the mailbox and it'll start moving the mail back. And once it's complete, we just simply hit close. And those messages have been recovered. SharePoint, same thing. We have another UI that you would use for SharePoint. You can put back everything from a list item to a document to a sub-site, site, farm, you name it. It retains everything from workflow to versioning to ACLs to you name it. It's all preserved. Structure, everything is there. And that's universal recovery. Universal recovery, anything to anything. What does the whole big picture look like? All right, so you have the concept of a local data center, whether it's one server or 20 or 200 or 20,000, doesn't matter to us. Virtual, physical servers both feeding into a AppAssure server, all right, that has a deduplicated repository. You need storage here, right, in order to store the data. And the next thing you'll do is you'll replicate that data over SSL to your disaster recovery site. And this can be anything. It could be in your basement at home, could be in the cloud, or anywhere in between. A colo facility, another campus that you have. It doesn't make a difference to us. Right? And that's the layout. It's very simple. Number one in backup and replication. Right? So we are the fastest image level application-aware backup and replication software on the market today. Near zero recovery time with the live recovery features. 5-minute RPO without impacting the environment. 5 minutes at 288 backups per day. Right? Company was born in 2006 when the virtual world was already in motion, as opposed to something that was written 20 or 30 years ago that didn't know anything about it. We've been VMware Elite TAP program members since the beginning, and we've been built from the ground up to take advantage of all of the benefits of virtual, and we handle physical as well. Right? 3,450% growth in a market that's growing at 4 to 6% annually. We're doing something right here. All right? 7th fastest growing software company, and that's not just backup and recovery. That's all software companies. We've got over 1,200 partners. We've got over 6,000 customers in 50 countries. Everything from individual mom and pops to some of the largest companies in the world. 10 of the top the top industry awards. Most recently, we've got the Virtualization Review magazine winner for best disaster recovery. At the tail end of 2011, 2 gold stars from Windows IT Pro. Best backup, best disaster recovery. And the list keeps growing and growing and growing. Right? Best in show, for tech ed. Lots and lots of good stuff. Thank you for coming. For more information, obviously, AppAssure.com is one of the best places to go. You can get a free trial there. It's a 14-day, fully functional trial version of the software. Right? Sales at AppAssure.com. If you're looking for more, information, you want it quick. For partners and then managed service providers, we have separate landing pages for you guys. /partners/MSP. Follow us on Facebook. All right, so it's facebook.com/AppAssure. Twitter, we are at AppAssure. We have a blog. It's blog.appassure.com. I'm constantly on the blog. If you have interesting topics you want to hear more about, you can send me some comments, and I'll get there. Right, I'll get that topic written up. So once again, thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on the next one.